If we want to give our patients accurate and effective treatment, then we have to have distinctions around what kind of lenses we're using to understand what's even going on with them in the first place. Because as a physician, the first half of our job is sensory, meaning we listen, we take into account what's going on with the patient's presentation. And then the second half of the job is our motor or our interventions. And this is what's going on in any kind of clinical interaction. And you're going to notice we've got a scale on the left from concrete to abstract, right? The further down something is, the more concrete it is. The further up, the more abstract it is. So when we enter the conversation with a patient, we're entering it at any different level depending on where they're coming in. And our job as a physician is to skillfully navigate this so that we don't get confused, because we want to do a good job. So what often happens is patients will come in and they'll be talking about a symptom, a chief complaint. Maybe they'll have observable signs that we can see, things we can look at. Other things that fall into the same category would be lab reports, anything observable, right? This is all just taking in information about the situation. If we stop right there and we just have a list of symptoms or lab findings or something like that, and we move straight to a treatment, it's going to be symptom-based, right? Symptom suppression at best. Okay, these are branch treatments. Branch. So we're not getting anywhere near the cause of the symptoms. We're not doing anything underlying. We're just looking at symptom suppression. Hey, I have a cough. Oh, cough? Say no more. Here are the herbs that stop cough. Oh, hey, this lab report came back and one tiny biomarker looks like it's out of range. Oh, okay, I'm going to go on PubMed and research herbs that affect that one biomarker. Right? This is the level of conversation and clinical thinking that's happening here. It's not bad or wrong, but we all know somewhere deep in our bones that there's a more rich and vivid patient experience, which we can do. Controlling the way we think about these things will give us different kinds of results with our cases. So the next step usually is to go from symptoms and branch treatments, and we try to cluster all this together, right? Symptom patterns, lab reports, all these things, and we look for a diagnosis, a disease, right? This is Western medicine, conventional medicine. They're looking at these things all the time, right? We have all these different disease diagnoses. Oh, you have depression. Oh, you have ulcerative colitis, right? Based on your lab reports and your symptoms, right? Based on this level of information, right? These are things that are concrete. You see, look, concrete relative to the diagnosis. That's more abstract, isn't it? Because we can see on a lab report concrete numbers. We can talk to a patient about the concrete symptoms that they're feeling. This stuff is substantial, right? And then we kind of group this into a more abstract idea, a concept of ulcerative colitis. It's a disease, something we created, right? Cluster headaches, premenstrual syndrome, all these different things. Idiopathic infertility, right? It's a disease diagnosis. It's abstract compared to the actual evidence that we have at this level. So we can also use interventions that work on the disease level, right? So in an effort to do a better job here and give better treatments, most medical paradigms actually become more abstract. So the treatments that they're going to come up with are going to be even more abstract. We have disease-based treatments. And this is where we have very mixed results. There's no long-term independence. There's no exit strategy. Oh, you have hypothyroidism. Right? Okay, well, you're going to take this thyroid supplement. Well, how does that work? Well, you're just going to have to keep taking it, and your thyroid's going to be supplemented by it, which means your thyroid's going to become weaker over time, and you're going to need more of it. And that's it. This realm of thinking is pretty much all that's out there for conventional medicine and a lot of alternative medicine. I also see people in functional medicine, Eastern medicine, thinking like this as well, which is why I'm making this video, because we know this stuff's out there, but it needs to be organized so we can understand it, right? We know that there's more to this, but I want to show you how we can move from abstract to concrete, and so we can catch ourselves. If it's tempting to go up into the land of abstraction with your patients, that is a sign to instead double down and go into something more concrete. So I'll show you what I mean by that, because we have here is patterns. So in Eastern medicine, we look at patterns. What are patterns? Things like damp heat in the liver, kidney yang deficiency, wind cold attacking the exterior, right? These kinds of things. The patterns are the initial conditions from which the symptoms, complaints, lab reports emerge. This is causative, right? The patterns cause the symptoms emerge from the patterns. So what we're looking at is a chain of causality, right? Patterns give symptoms, then we round up the symptoms, look at some labs, give you a disease diagnosis. We're going from something more substantial, even though it's hard to see. You can't look at somebody and just see that, oh yes, it looks like you have spleen Qi deficiency and damp cold, right? B syndrome. You can't always just like get the printout. But this is what's going on. This stuff is very real. It's very elemental. Because what do we see? We see this in nature. Heat, cold, dryness, dampness, high pressure, low pressure, wind. This stuff is real. It's concrete. It's in the world around us. Do you ever see fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, right? That stuff's not out in nature. Those are abstractions. They're abstract ways to look at problems. Lab reports as well. This is part of the argument. I know I don't want to make it an argument, but this conversation about functional medicine and Eastern medicine, they can be compatible, but functional medicine doesn't have anything below this. They don't understand patterns. There are some things we'll get to here that functional medicine can intervene in, which is good. This is why it's kind of the way forward for conventional medicine. They have to start to embrace this. But at this level, it's very distinct. Only Eastern medicine has this, as I've seen. Possibly like Ayurveda, but I still would consider that Eastern medicine. I mean, you're still over in the same general global region. So patterns, right? Heat, cold, dryness, dampness, these sorts of things, how they interact with the body, with the forces in the body. And now when we make a pattern diagnosis, we can get a pattern-based treatment, which is going to be more effective always, as opposed to a symptom suppression or disease-based treatment. So what do I mean by that? If you look at Eastern medicine and you say, okay, I want to find some herbs that are good for fibromyalgia, right? And you're going to disease, what level are you at? Let's look. That's fibromyalgia's diagnosis, right? It's not a pattern, it's a diagnosis. Oh, I want to get some good herbs for fibromyalgia. So I'm going to go on PubMed and I'm going to search for that, Chinese herbs fibromyalgia. And you're going to find all kinds of stuff. Yet, we know that different types of patterns can create different types of symptom clusters. And then they create an abstract diagnosis like fibromyalgia. That's an umbrella term that doesn't even really mean anything specific. It's a diagnosis of exclusion, right? So now we're catering. We're building our whole house on an abstract foundation and we're catering to that. And then we're looking at research. And then we're going to find herbs that may or may not work. You may get lucky. You may not. The only way you get lucky is if the pattern actually happens to match. We're so much better off, right, to go down here. The deeper down we can go, the better. Same thing for the symptoms. Oh, I have fibromyalgia, so I have pain. Oh, okay, well, here are some herbs that are good for pain. Here's CBD oil. Sure, great. Yeah, it's helpful, right? Oh, here's turmeric, right? Oh, it's good for inflammation, good for pain. Well, maybe they don't need to be moving blood just yet. Maybe there's actually some dampness or some wind that needs to get resolved before we go to blood movers. So when we're looking at patterns, we don't make those kinds of mistakes. This is foundational stuff. It's fundamental. A lot of practitioners, we all have an ego, right? But a lot of practitioners will turn their nose up at this. Oh, Jeremy, this is obvious. Well, if it was that obvious, I wouldn't see so many questions in the forums about acupuncturists asking for advice on their patients using this language and this language. Right? Trying to go, oh, I have got a patient with this disease. Who's had good luck with that? What's the herb formula? Okay. No, guys, we have to look deeper. Oh, I've got a patient with this lab report. What's the herb? I'm trying to find herbs that interact with some tiny biochemical. I can't find anything. What do you know? Guys, go back to the basics. The basics are basic for a reason. They're foundational. Common sense is not always common practice. We have to be humble as we grow. Even if we've been in practice for years, decades, it doesn't matter. If we're out here on a more abstract branch trying to help a person, we do not have root under us. Now, what do we have down here? Let's take a look at this. Check this out. Because we're looking at concrete to abstract emergence and causality, right? So what influences patterns? Well, these are inputs. Genetics, lifestyle, environment, the foods you eat, the weather, the place where you live, the time of year, the kind of relationships you have, the people you surround yourself with, right? All these things are inputs. That's fuel for patterns. That's pattern fuel. So the inputs are actually where we have some of the most leverage. You'll see the further up you go here, the less leverage you have. It's just how it works. The further down you go, the more leverage you have. So some of our job here may actually be lifestyle advice and removal of problematic inputs, removal of triggers. We have things like yang sheng, right, which is basically just taking care of your health. Feng shui, trying to keep your house clear of pathogens and mold and those kinds of things, right? All this stuff, lifestyle. It's lifestyle. So this is really interesting because we'll see a paradox here where some of our classical texts and really great doctors will say things like, oh, herbs and interventions, acupuncture, all these things, they are powerful, but it's the inferior physician who uses those. The superior physician prevents disease in the first place, right? And what they're saying is we want to go down here whenever we can. And yeah, sometimes we do have to intervene, right? Sometimes we do have to move up on this chart. But for the most part, if we can stay grounded in things that are the most concrete, like, hey, stop eating garbage. Yeah, or maybe, try to manage your relationships better. Try to find ways to get out of a system that's built to keep you sick, right? These kinds of things. Turn off your TV. Yeah, stop getting all worked up about the latest thing, the attention hijacking going on. There's a lot of stuff like that where we have leverage. It gets really interesting because we'll have practitioners with degrees and credentials that are trying to solve problems up here in very abstract ways. Oh, hello, colleagues. I've got a case of atopic dermatitis, right? Disease diagnosis. What works for that? Yet, there may be somebody with no degrees, no credentials, a health coach, right? Somebody that just is a podcast influencer, wellness person, or whatever, who's working at this level, telling people to get rid of the Glade plugins in their house, like these air fresheners and chemicals and stuff like that, right? And that advice actually has more healing impact for the patient's condition with the dermatitis than whatever kind of abstraction we're chasing up here. So you got to know where you're at on this, right? We don't always just want to live down here. Sometimes we do have to do these things. But generally, the further up you are on this with your line of thinking, the less leverage you have. The more you're going to be chasing your tail, the more your patients are going to get exhausted and they're going to fall through the cracks. Because what catches them is this stuff down here. We have this with Eastern medicine. Patterns, patterns, patterns. So instead of going, hey, I've got these symptoms, right? Here's how you win. I'll show you right now. I've got these symptoms of this patient. I've got these lab reports. Hey, colleagues, what herbs do you know for these symptoms or this lab report or this reductionist chemical? No, instead of doing that, what we can do is go, let's figure out what the pattern is. And then we can do a pattern-based treatment from there. Oh, I've got this patient. Crazy. They've got Hashimoto's thyroiditis. What are the herbs for that? No, slow down. What's the pattern? Come home. Come down to the foundation fundamentals. Do not get distracted out here in the land of 10,000 things. Come back to the patterns. Okay, these are the patterns I've got. Here's a pattern-based treatment. Great. That's an intervention you can do with the patient. Now also, let's keep in mind, what are the inputs that cause that pattern? And how can we start to affect things on that level as well, right? We want to be able to do this over here very thoroughly, right? And make sure that everything's getting connected and worked because this is the highest leverage.